We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these ends governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government shall become destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Good morning. Nice to see everybody's smiling face on this day after July 4th. I hope we all had a wonderful celebration. Was the weather wonderful or what? We finally got a good break. So I think the universe is telling us that even though the world is in turmoil, we can still celebrate Independence Day and believe that that will remain our history forever. But we'll talk about that a little bit this morning. I'm happy to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of the Rappahannock, where we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person and share values centered around love, equity, generosity, interdependence, justice, pluralism, and transformation. We gather in fellowship every Sunday from different backgrounds, lifestyle, spiritual beliefs, and experiences. All are welcome. May our joining together this morning be a blessing to all. Joyous times on our UUFR 6th principle, affirming and promoting the goal of world community and peace, liberty, and justice for all. Words that we celebrate and hopefully honor. And I don't have steady hands, so I always grew up with the trimmer. And when I took speech in high school, the boys would always say, "Oh, teach, let Stelaine speak. We like to see her shake." So you guys can enjoy that too. Well, I do that when I'm service leader. To open the service focused on demythifying American history, I'm going to share excerpts from a poem written in 1939 by Archibald MacLeish. But before I do, a quote attributed to Maya Angelou. Won't it be wonderful when Black history, Native American history, and Jewish history is taught all in one book, just U.S. history? So Archibald MacLeish, America Was Promises, 1939. And these are just excerpts. This is a long poem. I've just excerpted from it. Who's the voyager in these leaves? Who is the traveler in the journey? Deciphers the revolving night, receives a signal from the night returning. America was promises to whom? East were the dead kings and the remembered sepulchres. West was the grass and all was beautiful. All before us, America was always promises. Jefferson knew, declared it before God and before history, declares it still in the remembering tomb. The promises were man's. Now remember, this was 1939. The promises were man's. The land was his. Man endowed by his creator. It was man the promise contemplated. The times had chosen man, no other. And man turned into men in Philadelphia, practicing prudence on a long-term lease, building liberty to fit the parlor, and the aristocracy of politic selfishness bought the land up, bought the towns, the sites, the goods, the government, the people, bled them, sold them, kept the profit, lost itself. We do not ask for truth now from John Adams. We do not ask for tons from Thomas Jefferson. We do not ask for justice from Tom Paine. We ask for answers. And there is an answer. There's Spain, Austria, Poland, China, Bohemia. There are dead men in pits in all of those countries. Their mouths are silent, but they speak. They say the promises are theirs who take them. Listen, brothers, generation, companion of leaves, of the sun, of the slow evenings, companions of the many days, all of them. Listen, believe the speaking dead, believe the journey is ours. Oh, believe the signals were to us, the signs, the birds by night, the break and surf. Believe America is promises to take. That was written in 1939. I tell you about our speaker, Reverend Sara Goodman. Reverend Sara is a settled minister at UU Community Church in Glen Allen. She's a lifelong Unitarian Universalist raised in San Diego, where she met her husband, Sean. Since then, they've lived in Madison, Wisconsin, New York City, and St. Paul, Minnesota. Can you pick 3 better cities to live in? She spent the early part of her life acting and directing. She studied acting and directing theater productions, traveling and striving to learn everything there is to know about pop culture. She enjoys throwing pottery, reading contemporary feminist romance, and playing with her children, their yellow lab, and her annoying cat. In addition to serving UUCC as their minister, Reverend Sara chairs UU Wellspring, a series of programs for spiritual deepening and grounding in UU values and theology. She's a member of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association and the Liberal Religious Educators Association. Reverend Sara will talk to us today about demythifying, and I think that's a word she made up, America. We will let her unpack that herself. Her readings leading to the talk, Declaration of Independence by Richard Blanco, and a Declaration Not of Independence by Ralph Salisbury. Reverend Sara?
So the first reading is the Declaration of Interdependence by the poet Richard Blanco, Cuban-American writer, the 2019 UUA GA Ware lecturer, and the 5th ever inaugural poet, the youngest first Latino immigrant and gay person to serve in such a role at that time. So here's the reading. Some of the language you'll recognize. Such has been the patient sufferance. We're a mother's bread, instant potatoes, milk at a checkout line. We're her 3 children pleading for bubble gum and their father. We're the 3 minutes she steals to page through a tabloid, needing to believe even the stars' lives are joyful and bruised. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. We're her second job, serving an executive absorbed in his Wall Street Journal at a sidewalk cafe, shadowed by skyscrapers. We're the shadows of the fortune he won and the family he lost. We're his loss and the lost. We're a father in a coal town who can't mine a life anymore because too much and too little has happened for too long. A history of repeated injuries and usurpations. We're the grift of his main streets, blacked out windows, and graffitied truths. We're a street in another town lined with royal palms, at home with a Peace Corps couple who collect African art. We're their dinner party talk of wines, wielded picket signs, and burned draft cards. We're what they know. It's time to do more than read the New York Times, buy fair trade coffee and organic corn. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. We're the farmer who grew the corn, who plows into his couch as worn as his back by the end of the day. where his TV set blaring news, having everything and nothing to do with the field dust in his eyes or his son nestled in the ache of his arms. We're his son. We're a Black teenager who drove too fast or too slow, talked too much or too little, moved too quickly but not quick enough. We're the blast of the bullet leaving the gun. We're the guilt and the grief of the cop who wished he hadn't shot. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We're the dead. We're the living amid the flicker of vigil candlelight. We're in a dim cell with an inmate reading Dostoevsky. We're his crime, his sentence, his amends. We're the mending of ourselves and others. We're a Buddhist serving soup at a shelter alongside a stockbroker. We're each other's shelter and hope. A widow's 50 cents in a collection plate and a golfer's $10,000 pledge for a cure. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We're the cure for hatred caused by despair. We're the good morning of a bus driver who remembers our name, the tattooed man who gives up his seat on the subway. We're every door held open with a smile when we look into each other's eyes, the way we behold the moon. We're the moon. We're the promise of one people, one breath, declaring to one another, I see you. I need you. I am you. Our second reading is A Declaration Not of Independence by Ralph Salisbury, of Cherokee and Irish American heritage. He served in World War II and afterward became an anti-war pacifist. The poem is dedicated for his mother and father. Apparently, I'm my mom's immaculate conceived Irish American son because Social Security time comes. My Cherokee dad could not prove he'd been born. He could pay taxes, though, financing troops who'd conquered our land and could go to jail. And the time he had to shoot or die by a Caucasian attacker's knife, he had to go to jail. So eluding the recreational killer's calendar's enforcers while hunting my family's food, I thought what the hunted think, so that I ate not only meat, but the days of wild animals fed by the days of seeds, themselves eating earth's eons of lives fed by the sun, rising and falling as quail hurtling through the sky, fell from gunpowder, come as the first Americans came from Asia. Explosions in cannon. I have an English name, a German, Chilean, American wife, and she could live a white life, but with this hand with which I write, I dug my 16th summer, a winter's supply of yams out of hard battlefield clay, dug for my father's mother, who, abandoned by her husband, raised alone a mixed blood family and raised, her tongue spading the air, ancestors, a winter's supply or more. So this weekend marked the 249th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And finally, the myths around the founding of this nation are starting to be examined with a critical lens by the general public. As one of our friends mentioned, speaking the Declaration aloud is now being a critical. Sorry, it was funny. With the spate of books and TV shows, and yes, even musicals, Hamilton, about the men who founded this country, we as a nation are trying to understand what brought us to this point in history. Previous to the success of Lin-Manuel Miranda's hit musical Hamilton, the man Alexander Hamilton was only famous to me from a Got Milk commercial. Do y'all remember this commercial? Okay. There was a fictional call-in show where the question was, who killed Alexander Hamilton? And we see the gentleman in his home surrounded by all the history, and he knows exactly who it is, and he's trying to call, but he had just taken a big bite of peanut butter sandwich. And he couldn't get his mouth to say Aaron Burr, or he couldn't get them to understand that that was what he was saying. So he was hoping he got milk so he could answer the question. So in the musical, we found out in the very opening number, because it is part of our history, that Aaron Burr is the person who killed Alexander Hamilton in a famous duel. And if you didn't know, Alexander Hamilton shot into the air. Aaron Burr shot him. And he, at that moment, was the Vice President of the United States of America. So anyone with a Disney Plus login can experience Hamilton the Musical, which premiered on July 3rd, 2020. A balm for the weary spirits of Americans living in COVID lockdown. In the 2.5-hour show recorded in 2016, the audience, maybe some of you have seen it, maybe not, experienced a retelling of American history, starring a cast of mainly people of color. As the description says, America then, told by America now. This adaptation of American history is not meant to be an accurate series of events, but an inspirational story of people working hard and persevering through the impossible. Maybe this is what the founders of our country would want you or us to take away from this story. But as George Washington reflects in the finale of Hamilton, let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control over who lives, who dies, who tells your story. But when you're gone, who remembers your name? Who keeps your flame? Who tells your story? So historians tell the stories, they build the myths, and the culture picks them up and turns the myths into narratives that shape the lives of the people. You might think that the history is plain. The founding fathers freed themselves from the tyranny of taxation without representation, creating a new kind of nation and a government ruled not by a monarch, but by a leader elected fairly by the people. This is, of course, the simplified myth of our founding, ignoring the nation's genocidal colonial past and the fact that more than 20% of the people in the newly formed United States were barely considered people at all, but property. In her riveting book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, Roxanne Dunbar Oritz reminds us again and again and again that white people forming this nation were in fact settler colonialists who seized land and territory from the continent's original inhabitants with the intentional use of genocide and genocidal tactics such as forced displacement and coerced assimilation. She also connected this history to England and most of Europe's transition into capitalism, where the ownership of property and the resources to be squeezed from that property was suddenly a commodity that accumulated wealth. She writes, in settler colonialism, Europeans extorted people with the promise of land and private property so that the land itself became the chief commodity in the primitive accumulation of capital. And that promise that led settlers to move to the New World, the promise that each adult man would be given or somehow earn land to own, thus freeing themselves from poverty. But the problem with this promise is, of course, that the land was already occupied by indigenous North Americans. The myth that the indigenous people of the North American continent were savages and murderous was perpetuated by settlers and governments alike to stoke genocidal reactions. Moving or killing off the native people was the only way that the land could become available for more and more and more settlers. In fact, the founders of this nation were so caught up in this myth that this is the last line of the grievances listed in the Declaration of Independence. And King George has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. They accuse the king of encouraging the indigenous people that live near the borders of the new colonies to reclaim their lands, when the king knew that they were using genocidal tactics to fight back against the colonials. In other words, the signers of the Declaration of Independence were claiming that England was encouraging the indigenous people to slaughter the settlers in the same way that the settlers were being encouraged by England to slaughter the indigenous people. So all I hear as a mom is, how dare you do to me what I did to them? All I hear is, if we give minorities power, they'll use it to crush us. And all I hear is, mommy, little sister's stealing my toy. Obviously, there's a lot more nuance than that in this history. There were decades of ignoring pleas for justice and thwarting attempts at creating order. There was excessive use of force, and there were extrajudicial killings by the military. The birth of this nation freed one set of people, one limited, privileged, white-skinned people, but ensured the destruction and erasure of many more people. The indigenous people are still living in limbo in this country. In a declaration not of independence, poet Ralph Salisbury writes about this contradiction. Because apparently, he says, I'm mom's immaculate conceived Irish-American son because Social Security time come, my Cherokee dad could not prove he'd been born. He could pay taxes. He could finance troops who conquered our land and could go to jail the time he had to shoot or die by a Caucasian attacker's knife. His father couldn't prove his citizenship, and yet the taxes he paid anyway fed the institutions that historically conquered their homeland while currently enforcing oppressions. So if he were living today, he would probably be in a camp in the Florida jungle, a native-born brown person unable to prove his citizenship and therefore despicable and dispensable. I just need to tell you, though, when I was writing this sermon, I listened to hours of explosions on the 4th of July, just hours and hours of explosions. I used to love fireworks. They were so cool. We could go to the water. I grew up in San Diego, go out to the water and watch the annual show, and then trek the mile back to our car and sit in the hour and a half long traffic jam to get home. And it all seemed worth it because it was beautiful. But now, as my home was surrounded by explosions and I cringed worrying about them waking my children or burning down the neighborhood, or I'm worrying about my neighbors with PTSD, about the terrified animals, about someone calling the police on our Black neighbors, I don't love them so much anymore. The fireworks remind me that there was still genocide happening in this world. The fireworks now remind me of Gaza, decimated by bombings, the people starving and being gunned down while waiting for aid. The fireworks are not a fun little reminder of the past. They're actively traumatic now. What a messed up thing that celebration of our nation's freedom is now tied to bombs. We recreate the bombs that were dropped and the destruction they caused, and we don't even acknowledge the lives that were taken. When we sing the rocket's red glare, bombs bursting in air, we aren't talking about fireworks, though. We're talking about warfare. And in the words of King George III in Hamilton, I will murder your friends and family to remind you of my love. That sounds healthy, right? Yeah. The revolutionaries fought for and with their lives. We say for freedom, but what were they really fighting for? The myth says taxation without representation, but I think it was more than that. I think they were trying to fight for the ability to live their lives without fear. I think we're all trying to do that. What an idealistic notion to found this nation on, one where people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it certainly hasn't played out entirely that way. The founders were all respected and powerful men who did not want to give up their income, their wealth, their profit. So was this conflict about tea, or was it about capital? Was it about freedom, or was it about maintaining the practice of international slave trade? Or was it about trying to break free from being used as capital in capitalism, except that they didn't know what that was yet, really? So they just reinvented it, stronger and meaner. When capital is tied tightly to the labor of bodies, the value of that capital is far less if you have to pay your labor force. If the colonies wanted to be not treated as capital, they had to begin to face the fact that their wealth and financial structures were based on slave labor. They accuse England of barbaric treatment of them while perpetrating even more barbaric treatment of the people whose labor and bodies they used to create the world we are living in. It seems like the America we are told stories about didn't actually exist and still doesn't. This land, if you mean this country, was made for a certain group of people, a certain group of white men, not actually you and me. This is my home, as we sang in our earlier hymn, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. This hymn, the patriotic hymn to the tune of Finlandia, is a call to peace and mutual understanding. But even this hymn is based on understanding that this land, a place is owned by a people. When we talk about this land, we speak to an understanding that we were meant to be here, all of us, that it was our manifest destiny to own this part of the North American continent. But the indigenous people would disagree because this land is their homeland, but they know that this land cannot be owned by any one person or nation or country. This land is here for everyone. It is here to sustain us all. We're not masters of the land. We are part of the ecosystem. We are part of the interdependent web of all existence. So who owns the land? Who owns the country? Who owns the people within it? Whose are we? Whose are we? But what is America now, if not the mishmash of stolen and living culture, subdued by the broken dreams of capitalism and built on stolen land by the hands and backs of enslaved people? So how do we face this history? I don't know. What myths do we live in now? Well, Richard Blanco offers us a picture, a present, and now we could embrace in the Declaration of Interdependence. We are overworked and underpaid mothers and fathers. We're wealthy, progressive folks and farmers. We're coal miners. We're Black sons of Black mothers dying in the streets. We're the incarcerated. We're a Buddhist serving soup at a shelter alongside a stockbroker. We're each other's shelter and hope. A widow's 50 cents in the collection plate and a golfer's $10,000 pledge for our cure. We are all of us together. And we hold these truths to be self-evident. We are the cure for hatred caused by despair. We're the good morning of a bus driver who remembers our name, the tattooed man who gives up his seat on the subway. We're every door held open with a smile when we look into each other's eyes, the way we behold the moon. We are the moon. We're the promise of one people, one breath, declaring to one another, I see you. I need you. I am you. I see you. I need you. I am you. May we live this promise every day. Oh, thank you. I'll just stay here.
Thank you for the delicious paradox. One of the many communities that I'm in suggests that all of the challenges that we have are shadows. And within those shadows are gifts. But we have to lean into them. And leaning into them is just what you've done for us today. And from my Gestalt perspective, there's a paradoxical theory of change that says if you're going to change, you have to first be totally honest with where you actually are, not in the myths that we've been taught. And so again, thank you so much for grounding us in such a good way with the really terrible realities that got us to this place. And our job is not to wrap ourselves in that drama,
Totally.
but to lean into it and move through it and say, what is the lesson for me in my daily life? And what can I do? As this is a mirror of an aspect of me because, oh yeah, I'm connected to everybody, which is difficult because we have the illusion of separation. And we have been conditioned to live next to our neighbor and not know them. And conditioned to stay in those family dynamics that are unhealthy. And fortunately, we have us as a community, a place to come and share all those variances, but also the beauty. And so thank you so much for that. And my question is, what inspired you on this occasion to share this story with us?
Well, the country as it is, the law that just passed, the 4th of July weekend, the 10th anniversary of Hamilton coming out, all of it, despair that I'm trying not to live into, inspired to pull our history so we can make a better future. Yeah, thanks.
So I have a question for everybody. How many of you guys have read the Declaration of Independence recently? I did, and preparing for this, just trying to get a broader sense of what might be coming in this wonderful talk. I loved the title. I knew Reverend Sara would wow us, and you did. But I was gobsmacked because almost everything that we were fighting for 250 years ago and counting, we are fighting right now. Almost there. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was really a lot to think about.
Yeah.
One myth, this is more of a technical thing.
Sure.
Many years ago, decades ago, I read in Smithsonian Magazine. They examined the pistols that were used in the duel between Hamilton and Burr. Those pistols were provided by Alexander Hamilton. When they x-rayed them, they were trick pistols with trigger fingers. So there's the possibility that Hamilton knew that he might not have known what kind, but he knew he provided these pistols thinking that it would cause Burr to misfire. And instead, he misfired. And Burr took his time, carefully shot him. Burr did kill him, but it might not have been such a noble act on Hamilton's part to shoot in the air.
I mean,
Yet
it was
another myth.
customary at the time for people to shoot into the air. So, but yeah, y'all can do a lot more exploration on that piece of history for sure. And it's explored a little even in the musical Hamilton. It's not clear that he didn't go in wanting to die. So it's very open, that piece of history for sure. Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, are there other comments, questions? Then we shall thank Reverend Sara. This was a really inspiring talk. Thank you so much.